Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well out there. It is time for a new lecture covering some material that I had to get reacquainted with last year as I was teaching my 9th graders. And this is a story entitled There Will Come Soft Rains. It's a very popular story by the science fiction author Ray Bradbury, who I think passed away within the last 10 years or so. There are some good documentaries out there where you can see him giving some interviews toward his later years, which is kind of nice to hear if you start to scour YouTube for science fiction documentaries and such. This is a very popular story. This is the kind of story that is highly anthologized in literature textbooks around the country, including California, where I know we've had this in textbooks over the years. I read it years and years ago at the beginning of my teaching career, so I can't say my ideas about it were really that well established, but I think after going through with it with a lot of talented 9th graders at my high school, some ideas have definitely come to light here, and we'll do a chronological walkthrough of the story. What I'm going to do as a follow-up to this lecture soon enough will be based on what's said to be the companion piece to this, which is the Million-Year Picnic, which is kind of a different story, but I think some of the themes obviously are connected because they're kind of considered sister pieces, companion pieces to each other. So let's get right into it. I think if you go online, if you are here on YouTube and you start to look, about up information about the story, you get a pretty cursory, a pretty superficial understanding of this story. I think what they tend to do in those videos is really highlight what's already kind of self-explanatory within the text, but we're going to take some of that and definitely go deeper. So it's reminding me of how we covered this in class. What I like to do is usually have a Kami document open, and maybe that's something I can consider for these videos in the future. I just don't know if I'm allowed to use Kami on a YouTube video. I'm not sure about that. I might have to contact the company. But I do love Kami. I don't have any kind of ties to them at the moment, but that is a wonderful software, especially for teaching and covering texts kind of in depth. In fact, I've printed this off of Kami from the work that we did. All right, so we start with There Will Come Soft Rains, the title. And I like to point out the irony of this title because what it's essentially juxtaposed against is what's led to this last house standing in this obliterated kind of suburban neighborhood, and that is nuclear warfare, right? Which is still, as many people would say, the biggest existential threat that we have to our lives, right? The fact that there are nuclear submarines patrolling at all hours of the day, ready to throw off nukes at various countries, right? Competing countries. So this is something we don't hear about too often, but it is definitely a certainty. I think for those older people who were living through the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and were more of an adult age, say, late 20s, 30s, it must have been a different experience, because I think that threat of kind of atomic or nuclear warfare was more steady in their lives. It was pitched at times. So I think nowadays we hear about it, but we don't have these events that take us very close to it. So I think about that experience sometimes as a younger adult, somebody who's only in their 40s at this point. But notice the juxtaposition, this peaceful, kind of quiet setting that we have in the story with just this house. It gets a little hectic at the end, but juxtaposed against nuclear warfare and the complete annihilation, right, that brings. All right, we get a lot of personification. If you're looking for a device to hang a hat on, for those of you having to write essays about this, or class discussions, whatever it's going to be, just notice the personification of the home. And even in the first sentence, we have two things. One, it's singing. Robots aren't supposed to sing. AI is not really supposed to sing. Notice that there are certain verbs, there are certain actions that we almost 100% attribute to human life. The idea of art. There's a wonderful book. I'll put the link right here for the lectures that will cover Rise of the Robots, which I'll be putting up soon enough, but they'll be linked here. And you can start to educate yourself more about the capabilities of AI, the real world happenings with AI and robots, and can they produce art? Can they be wonderful artists or expressionists of any kind? Or is that something that we find only humans can do, and that's a big distinction between us and whatever AI will become. So the fact that the house is singing, that's a very human-like attribute. Another thing is the house, we're given a simile here, it's singing as if it were afraid that nobody would get up in the home. And that idea of being afraid that something might not happen, again, is human, right? That is something that is uniquely human, that anxiety, that apprehension, that worry. And so to think that maybe an AI can possess that as well is, for some of us, beyond our imagination or belief, right? There's no way that that can happen. It's a big, contentious kind of issue, especially when it comes to morals and ethics of AI as we move forward and these systems just get more advanced. All right, so immediate personification of the home. And that's going to be carried forward throughout the text. What do we notice through all of the food that's laid out for this family? This is an automated home. We know what happens, right? We have a sense of what happens to this family. They're no longer there. But the food is being produced, and I remember with my students, we checked it out. Just, you see what's happening here, the amount of food. We lay it out. It seems like it's representative of the nuclear family unit, which is mom, dad, kid, or kids, and dog, cat, iguana, fish, whatever you put in the animal. That's a nuclear family unit, and that is, I think it's worth pointing out, because I think these themes are somewhat connected. That is one of the building blocks of capitalism, is the nuclear family, and the fact that the nuclear family has to keep consuming and buying for its own needs, whereas in other parts of the world, other parts even of this country, I know Hawaii, indigenous populations there, I always give the example, we'll see extended families, aunts, uncles, cousins, everybody living together to kind of have a more efficient sustaining of their lives, right, and not have to over-consume. I think what this story tells us is this, through the automated nature of this rather brilliant home, it definitely speaks to consumption, right, and keeping everything new, making sure everything is kept clean. Maybe that's all kind of, bulked together here. Now, we immediately, and I think this is where some of this analysis on YouTube totally has kind of it just doesn't even look at this stuff. And that's going to be the biblical stuff. Notice in the second paragraph, we get the hissing sigh from the stove, hissing, snakes and serpents. And we'll see how that's built upon later on. But this home is definitely equated, I believe, with some of those beastly characteristics. And this gets into, obviously religious and philosophical themes about who we are as human beings. Are we animals? Are we something more civilized than that? If you look at what happens in the story, and we've destroyed ourselves through nuclear annihilation, I think that might say we're animals to some extent that cannot contain these aggressive, instinctual, maybe, and impactful impulses, right? We cannot contain these things. Hence, nuclear annihilation and taking it to that point, which luckily in this world we haven't seen anything of this nature. So that speaks to the science fiction kind of nature of the story, things that haven't necessarily happened up to this point. So we have this nuclear family, right, that is all but missing from the scene here in this wonderfully automated home. Let me say one thing quickly about that. And this is all thematic, right? The various themes you can discuss when looking at the story. It's the advanced nature of the home. You see, I'm here at my house right now, and I would say this classifies this story. It was written in the 60s, I believe. And it classifies as predictive science fiction, which means he's predicting the way things will actually be years down the road, decades later, perhaps even longer than that. And here I am and you might yourself be sitting in a house that's very well automated, right? That technology makes things more efficient, easier on me. I have the irrigation system that comes up when I program it to. That makes things easier. I can kind of walk away from the whole process of keeping these plants nice, and I do take that stuff serious. So you can see, right? And that's just one small example of how these homes are completely automated. To this level, no. To this level, it's impossible, because I'll note later on in the story, things get to this surrealistic point. This doesn't even make sense. Even if it were the future advanced home, things get a little too surreal, I think, in this story, to really be able to take this as a kind of, example of exactly how a house will be. But we'll get there. Let's keep on going here. Just to check out a couple names. that we get some reminders. The AI system is reminding the homeowners of some important dates. One is Featherstone's birthday. I don't think there's too much to make of here except for the oxymoronic nature of that name, feather and stone. It speaks to contradiction. Maybe that sets us up for various contradictions throughout the story that we should be keeping our eye out for, right? That could be it. Talita, we get the anniversary of Talita's marriage. Talita just means little girl, right? That's what it translates to. I don't think the names are, these names in particular are all, not that important in my personal opinion. Like you'll find in other stories, they can be very suggestive. All right. I point this out quickly. It's, what Bradbury describes here, and I think he does a great job of it, especially considering he's in the 1960s when he's doing it. He's describing walls that are essentially infused with computer chips, right? And we know that they're getting exponentially smaller and exponentially cheaper to make, which means eventually, I remember hearing, you'll have a wall that is just filled with kind of nano-sized computer chips that can just turn into a TV screen, turn into this, turn into that. Things we haven't really experienced before, but as the processing becomes stronger based on what we can, build, these computer chips are just so small and so powerful and cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. Just get ready, all right? You're going to see some pretty amazing things. I think that's what he's trying to describe here, and in a way, you can see that predictive science fiction nature of the story, right? Because we're getting there. Next up, we keep up that motif of singing, kind of nursery rhymes to the family. Again, very paradoxical, very ironic when you consider the nuclear war and the complete human aggression that's led to this. Here we have this tone of the AI that's more like a nursery rhyme, kind of lulling or trying to kind of encouraging the family to wake up here in the morning and come get breakfast. All right, the home, more personification. The hot water whirled them down a metal throat which digested. So we see that he's describing almost like a garbage disposal as a metal throat, so making it as human as possible. It's one way to describe a garbage disposal, but maybe the intent is to make us think about the distinction between humans and robots a little bit more here, right? The human and the mechanical, the human and the technological moving forward. You also have the motif of time. The AI is constantly chiming out the passing time here, and it's very ironic because as time passes, it gets later and later. Like in your homes every morning, I'm sure there's a little bit of a hustle and bustle to get out the door to eat breakfast, whatever. Nobody's showing up, so there's kind of an irony there, right? No one's there. All right, let's talk a little bit about robot mice. Now, I think this is where you see some of the more surrealistic, dreamlike. Doesn't really make sense in terms of like what we really see in reality. This is where I think the story becomes very unbelievable in a way, because some of the stuff just doesn't even make sense. Now, we know that there are the Roombas, those little AI-driven vacuum cleaners, right? So we know that there's this technology that can automate itself and vacuum, and that leads to convenience in my life, right? I don't have to do that. I don't have one, but I don't have to do that anymore. So we understand that we're already there in terms of technology. We understand the purpose of it. But tiny robot mice? I don't think human beings would ever agree. Notice mice are kind of the inconvenience we try to keep out. I get them out here sometimes in the backyard in certain places, and we have to kind of remove them. They're a nuisance, right? And that's ironic because in this story, they're removing what they feel to be nuisances, right? But they are, in our lives, more or less nuisances. Maybe some of us choose to live with them, but I don't think most of us do. But what do? They're these little robot mice that come and they pick up dust, they pick up debris, and everything is swept away into an incinerator in the basement of this house. That's kind of crazy. There's some nice artistic renderings of this, some videos that you can find here on YouTube as well, so you can check those out, right? All right. Another thing that's quite surrealistic, doesn't really make sense, but it needs to be, is the fact that this is the only house left standing. Give me a break, come on. And it's in like almost perfect condition too. It's not like half of it's gone or singed or whatever. It's just the only house left standing. Again, we ask, Well, whoa, is that just luck of the draw? No, I think that's Bradbury saying, here is the final example of this home, the world that exists in, the conflicts that have arisen here, and let's now use it as a microcosm of what the actual world really was, right? So it has to be here so that we can examine, because I think it's strange that it's the only house, right? It's been stripped, some of it's been stripped evenly free of its white paint. White, oftentimes in terms of daylight, let's say, is symbolic of positive kind of aspects, right? So, but that's been stripped clean. So maybe that says something about the conflicts that have led to it, the division, right? These characteristics within the world of aggression, right? Greed, cruelty. We could probably name a few more. All right, now this is, I think, what a lot of students miss. In fact, I know my students, some of them, because my kind of protocol, I guess you could say, is to have them read it on their own, annotate, and then we come back together as a class. And for these, we actually read the whole story, which was nice. But a lot of them didn't really take note of or understand what this is referring to. And we see these images that have been scorched onto the wall. Look no further than Google, and you can type in the shadows of Hiroshima or shadows of Nagasaki, right? And what that's essentially going to bring you to is some images of the shadows that were essentially almost like a photograph, the way I remember hearing it described, because that the atomic blast on Hiroshima and Nagasaki dropped by the United States was so intense. It was just a flash of just heat, intense heat. Like a photograph, it just, for some people, they vaporized into thin air, but their shadows were essentially captured on the brick wall behind them or on the concrete below them. And you can start to look at some of those images. They're very revealing of the power and the devastation of those bombs, as well as the humanity of those people just going about their normal days. And there's this etching of their, a moment in their life forever, right? They did not see a bomb like that coming. Yes, there were pamphlets and da-da-da-da-da. You can get into those discussions of the warnings that were put into place by these Japanese people, but that totally seems to disregard the fact that those were their homes. They couldn't just flee in a matter of hours or days. And also the loyalty to the emperor in Japan is always something that usually escapes Western conversations. The fact that he was seen as almost a deity on earth, and they were going to stay where they were because that's where their deity was, right? That's the people that were under that deity. So something to consider, right? But what we have here is that last moments of this family when the bombs dropped and their images, their lives were essentially flashed against the wall here. Let's see what they're doing. I'd like to now look at the detail here. The man is mowing the lawn. It seems, I do that all the time around here in my backyard, and it feels very traditional. It feels very, dare I say, American Dream-esque, right? The man doing the lawn. The wife is picking up flowers. Flowers themselves being highly symbolic of growth and rebirth, right? This time of year, it's amazing to see all the flowers that are blooming. There's so many of them, right? So that comes with the symbolism all itself. And the last one is the two kids playing ball together, right? Throwing the ball back and forth, right? But the ball never came down, which obviously leads to a sense of kind of longing, regret perhaps, obviously incompleteness, right? The ball never coming down. So some nice images to analyze under the context of this is a nuclear bomb. This was, or an atomic blast. And we're seeing the last moments of these people, right? All right. Now, we see the very protective nature of the home. Lonely foxes and whining cats. That's the first animals to be said to be outside this home, but completely barred from entering, right? So in this overprotective state, we're not giving a subjective consideration of these animals in need. And look at the diction, lonely. I know if you're lonely and if I'm lonely, I want someone to be around. I'm sure you probably feel the same, especially because we're very social beings, human beings, just like the cows and all these other animals, dogs, you name it. Whining cats. Whining and maybe in terms of complaining about something or in need of something. We have our dogs and our cats. I don't know where my dog is right now. But when he's hungry, yeah, he whines. So these are animals. Now we jump to what we're really always talking about in literature, people. These are people in need being kept out of a home. Now this is what draws me for a little bit of a confusion. It says, and drawn shades in an old maidenly preoccupation with self-protection. So it does equate the protectiveness of this home with the protective nature of a mother, right? The maidenly preoccupation with self-protection. And I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, right? That one's, it's kind of up in the air for me. Moving forward, the dog enters scene, right? On the front porch, shivering, whining, obviously, like we just mentioned, in a state of need, right? And I think this is where we get into some of those religious, philosophical, ethical, moral considerations. What do you do with a dog, or, to make it more pressing perhaps, what do you do with a person in need? Do you close the door, or do you open it and let them in? And I think how you answer that question is really how you speak to this particular theme of the treatment of people in need, right? Moving forward. You get some nice description of the dog. Nice in terms of it gives us something to look at. It gives us something to analyze, but unfortunate for the dog. He was once huge and fleshy. Fleshy, weird word. I think it's used to create the biblical allusion to flesh, right? Our existence in the flesh as compared to something else, right? And the difficulties and challenges of this life, right, that we live here, right? Because it is of the flesh. It is the experiences of the body and the needs and the wants, and how it's hard to distinguish between those two things, right? Moving on, how is the dog doing now? Gone to bone, essentially emaciated, covered with sores, moving in through the house tracking mud, right? And this is the family dog, so it is let in, right? The dog is the only one to survive after all of this ordeal. Again, pretty miraculously, if you ask me. At the end of this paragraph, we get the phrase that these robot mice darting around the house, cleaning up after this unfortunate dog. I'll put the language here, angry at convenience, right? They are angry at convenience. That again speaks to that theme. Who are you? Are you the person that when somebody in a state of need comes into your life, right, or into your environment, you look at it as an inconvenience or a responsibility, right? How do you see this idea of human suffering, right? Or animals, but I think the animals are really just a quick launch pad to really talking about how we feel about each other, human beings, right? You can think about the various examples throughout history that give us some sense of this. The offending dust. That's more from the perspective of the home. How dare you bring dust into this home? Now I must clean it up with all of these automated methods that I have available, including these little robot mice. But that it's an offense to the home. It's an offense to a people to have people in a state of need, dirty, sleeping on the streets. On YouTube, there are all kinds of content creators that bring perspective to this idea of homelessness, people in a state of need, but sometimes you have to judge for yourself, is it coming with a certain opinion on the matter? Because at the end of the day, you always have to make up your own mind, right? But it's definitely a topic that we talk about, is the people who are in a state of need, whether it be globally, whether it be within our own country, our own state, and what the prevailing attitudes are within society. Do we help? Do we find it as a nuisance? Is it something we want to kind of scrape away as quickly as possible and just get back to some other agenda? I'll leave that up to you. Moving down, here we go. And I am amazed when people cover this on YouTube, which is a great platform. They don't talk about ball. Are you kidding me? Okay, so we get a interesting simile here, that all the debris and the mud and all the stuff that is kind of represents the unfortunate aspects of our society and our humanity, those left behind, those who have had trouble keeping up, the lives they lead, this idea of not helping or finding it more as to be an inconvenience, right? On and on and on. All that misery and suffering and ugliness and illness and whatever you want, whatever it is, it's fed into the cellar, metaphorically speaking here, and it's dropped into the sign vent of an incinerator. And here's your simile, which sat like evil Baal in a dark corner. And Baal, B-A-A-L, do a quick wiki on this, whatever, you'll find this is the god, one of the gods, I believe a fertility god, if I'm not mistaken, of the Babylonians. And what's more important here is what Babylon is. Babylonian civilization. And what you should know, there's some great videos here on YouTube that you can learn more about this. I did after I read this. They were technologically advanced. That is the tie to the house that we have. What is this house a metaphor for? Perhaps modern day society, but more precisely a modern day society that has been impacted by other civilizations such as Babylon and led to this technology is king type of attitude, right, that we have. Babylon was technologically advanced in many respects, including, which is key to this story and the kind of connections, military technology. Babylon had great military technology that allowed them easy conquest of other peoples, and that's usually how it goes. I was reminding my students of this. When you have a superior technology and countries have access to this, right, use of this for war, they usually conquer more. Look at the Spaniards and other groups in South America, right? And they came in with horses, gunpowder, you name it, right? And they were able to just obliterate the less advanced, not morally and ethically less advanced cultures, which they're making those claims back in the day, of course, to promote their own cause, but definitely technology, they had the upper hand. So I think that's the big connection with Baal, a society that deems itself valuable based on the technology it has created. Are we that society? That's another very relevant question. With Facebook, with Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google, YouTube, are we worshiping, and we put it dramatically, are we worshiping technology more than other aspects of human existence, right? Has technology taken over? Baal, I believe, is an indication of this. And what does technology in our lives kind of seek to do? Reduce the inconvenience, right? To make things more beautiful, I guess you could say, pristine, clean, right? And some of these ideas kind of come along with that. All right. As the dog is trying to get into the kitchen, the automated home is cooking up a splendid meal. And what we're left with is the idea of there being plenty of food there, but just not giving it to the dog, not finding the means to give it to the dog, not having the awareness to give it to the dog. Again, this is all metaphorical of our society, so I'll just make it quick. As a society, we probably have more than enough food, more than enough ways to get that food to people, and yet we still have people who are going hungry, right? Or don't have a place to sleep, even though there might be all kinds of real estate lying dormant, right? Nobody in it, and we could be filling these things up with actual people. The only problem is they don't have money to pay for it, right? So having an abundance, but still not having this kind of doorway, literal kind of doorway, shut to the people that actually need it. All right, the electrical robotic mice are definitely given lots of individual pieces of diction that give it a military feel. The word here used, regiments of mice, just like regiments of military kind of units, right? So we start to see a lot of military words that connect to the military, right? And we'll see some others here in just a little bit. All right. Let's talk about the theme, just so it's easier to look at this quick part, leisure versus work. What this house speaks to is when things tend to be completely automated, that means you got to do less. Imagine if I had something that and some people pay for gardeners. I do my own lawn, but what if I had a little device that did it all for me? I'd have more time to, well, what's going on in this house? Playing cards, which is obviously in the olden days, maybe a more popular way of leisure time, right? Martinis, which are drinks, alcoholic beverages, are manifesting on oaken bench with egg salad sandwiches. Notice the diction here, I'll point it out quick. All of these essentially mechanical things like playing card tables and alcoholic beverages with glass, glasses, all right? Look at the words being used: sprouted, fluttered, and manifested. These seem to be words that fit more nature, right, than robot or mechanical. So notice that Bradbury is definitely, throughout the story, blending the two, right? Maybe to show there is no difference at the end, or maybe to highlight the big distinction that might be there. But here it's strange. All these things are occurring in such a natural way, right? Even the tables, it says here, the tables folded like great butterflies, right? Bringing it back to the natural. Everything wants to go back to the natural. Why? Because of this paragraph here that brings us to the halfway point of the story. And this is the biggest paragraph by far that we have in the story, and it's describing the nursery. And I know my wife and I could tell you all day long about, putting the nursery together, because our kids aren't that old, and we remember these times. And what is it about when you put a nursery together? It says you're wondering about the state of innocence and the state of play and the state of aspiration for your child. And there's so many things, positive things, going through your mind, right, when you're putting a nursery together. Yeah, it's a little stressful because you want to make it the way you want it and get it right, but the themes that are represented by a nursery are so beautiful and powerful. And this might be that core of There Will Come Soft Rains. This might be, dare I say, a Garden of Eden, a kind of getting back to nature, animals, before human corruption, before some of those things that we speak to religiously, biblical, through biblical kind of parable and scripture, and other major texts out there, right? The Quran, the Torah, right? Others as well. What we have through Buddhism. It's always more moral and ethical, right? But this idea of going back to a more pure state than where we are now, which is, with this story, the end of humanity. It's obliterated itself through nuclear warfare, right? Can we get back? Here you have the blending of robot and nature once again. This is, I think, told in a wonderful way. We talk about the surrealistic aspects of this house, and there definitely are some, but this is kind of believable, the way the walls turn into like a safari, and you see some of these like robot animals kind of walking around, right? It's almost done in a holographic way, it seems, the walls, how they come to life. I think Bradbury does an amazing job describing it. It makes it very believable that the room can transform in this way. But we do get back to nature, and by the end of this paragraph, this important paragraph, it was the children's hour. Going back to a state of innocence. Before we were corrupted by ideas of maybe aggression, greed, cult, nationalism, tribalism, you name it, right? Children don't know much of that, especially small children. That takes, some part of your life to learn. We learn racism. There's a lot of truth to that, right? You grow up with it. And I think the quicker you grow up and realize it's around you and that maybe you experienced in it, even if it was through like joking ways, the sooner you realize what was going on, I think, and you read and get perspective, I think the better off you end up being. So we're going back to children. Before you even learn all that stuff that gives you perhaps a direct way of understanding different people in the world or different ideas in the world. All right, very good. Now we get the full Sarah Teasdale poem. Bradbury provides this allusion to this old poem, I think in the 1600s, but don't quote me on that. Maybe later than that. But this poem, I'm going to make it quick. It's called There Will Come Soft Rains. Remember, with old poetry, the tendency was to give the title of the poem would be just the first few words, right, or whatever the first phrase was. So here it is, There Will Come Soft Rains. And it's about not nuclear war, not atomic war, because in Sarah Teasdale's day, that was not even on the horizon. Nobody was even thinking about, you can't make that stuff up. Maybe some people were, but obviously that doesn't come into the 1940s, right, is when we start to see that level of violence, that level of power on display, right? So what she's really talking about here is just war in general. Well, war is always, that goes to show, war's been here for thousands upon thousands of years. We see it in throughout the world. We see it in all extremes, right? There's always war. And so what she's talking about here is how nature the next day, after this war has ravaged the countryside wherever it was staged, nature comes back. Nature takes over again. The animals come back out, the birds start flying through the air, start, making their nests, everything goes back to normal. But the only difference is people are gone. There's a lot of dead people now, and perhaps they vacated entirely these war zones, right? And then nature just kind of takes over. I'll read aloud here just the last couple lines, some of the last lines of the poem. And not one will know of the war. She's talking about animals in nature, and notice the extreme personification that she is doing in this poem, saying that animals, we're getting into the idea of concern of animals, what animals think about humans or don't think about humans. And that's personification, because in real life we don't know what animals think. We have no idea. We don't know how animals think. That could be one of the great mysteries that goes down of all time, is animal consciousness. Is it the same for dogs, cats? Is it the same for the octopus that's swirling out there in the waves? We don't know, right? So we're in the mind of animals here, or trying to be, and that's personification, when we start to think of them on the level of humans. But maybe that's also a sign of respect and dignity that we give these animals as well, right? That it's on the same level, Mother Nature, nature in general. So here we go. And not one will know of the war, not one will care at last when it is done. Not one would mind, neither bird nor tree, if mankind perished utterly. So nature takes over. Nature lives on, which seems to be one of the major themes. And it doesn't care about human beings, right? There's no affinity. It's not based on it, right? It will outlive. Think of the cockroach that will survive every disaster, right? It will live on. We won't. However, will we live on? Through AI? I think that could be one of the last things we talk about here in just a moment. The house begins to die. Again, extreme personification. There's the device to really talk about, I think, when you look at this poem, amongst others, but that one's used throughout the entire, the whole kind of story is based on that with the house. It begins to die. That's a human-like quality. Only humans can speak to what it is to die. Does our, even sometimes we're like, oh, my smartphone died. It didn't die. It ran out of battery, it ran out of juice, right? Whatever you want to say. It didn't die. To die is a human affair. We all will go through it someday, and you'll have something to say about it, right? Or think about it at the very end. But not technology, right? So the house begins to die here. Then we get this fire that starts to spread. And so it's really like, I was telling my students, it's like a battle here, right? The house and what it can do to fend off the fire and the fire. And I know when we think of fires, especially in California, we think, oh, bad, bad, bad. That's going to be negative, right? We don't want this fire to take down this house. Think of fire in terms of biblical allusion, right? Fire to burn down. Because once something has burned down, it can regrow, right? Even we practice that in California with, we set fires, right? Just because then it'll burn and it's all controlled, and then new stuff grows back, and that's what we're aiming for. Rebirth. To start over, we have to burn down the old, right? So there it is. Think about fire on that level, and I think fire is the hero. Fire is going to put this house to rest once and for all, right? And I think, for me at least, that seems like a positive. The house, however, is in a state of fury, like a human being. Does AI scream? Like on your, when you're doing directions on your phone and it's telling you for like, you have an upcoming left? Notice AI we don't have AI that screams, "Take a left, you moron! You almost missed your..." Right? We don't. That's not AI. Scream is a human action. Right? There's so much that goes into a scream, whether you are terrified, in a state of pain, a state of loss. Who knows? So much goes into a scream. So we get again, heavy personification of the home here at the end. Right? The mice come out filled with water, the robot mice, and here's the word, pistoling, right? Pistoled their water. Again, soldiers, war, right? Taking us back to, I think, an element of army, nation, which it has to, because who's going to blow us up with nuclear bombs? It's going to be the armies of nations. It is going to be the governments of nations that are the ones directing those bombs and blowing up your average citizen, right, if that day ever comes. As we love to see played out in science fiction stories so much here, right? So, war, military. Talk about the military budget. I won't get into it. Watch some other of the lectures that we have, right, up on the channel, the Chomsky lectures. I'll link them here if you want to find out more about the amount of money that's going into the military in more modern terms, right? All right, moving forward. Here is a very important sentence toward getting toward the end here. It's the fire backed off, and we get a simile here, as even an elephant must at the sight of a dead snake. So the fire is like an elephant that's backing away from a dead snake, right? And this, I think, solidifies the positive attributes of the fire. It's kind of the hero of the story at the end here, burning down this house and what this house represents. Technology, a centering of our lives on technology instead of other aspects, right? Like giving and humanity, right? Greed, military, right? Competitiveness on a world stage, right? All of that. And the fire is backing off like an elephant, scared of the snake. What is the snake? The serpent, right? That which represents the worst of us. And so you see the fire is even scared of the snake, the serpent, temptation, what it represents, even it being dead, right? Which is usually how it goes. I guess elephants easily scare with certain things. The fire was clever. More personification of the fire here. People are clever. And not just people. As I was telling my students, heroes are clever. Why do we love and why do we applaud our Harry Potters and our Luke Skywalkers and our Wolverines, or whatever movie you might be watching, right? Because they are clever, they are smart, they are witty, they are, they can improvise in a smart way. The fire is clever, right? This is our hero here at the end. All right, we get one more thing here. Just like we had the silhouettes being splayed upon the walls because of that idea of nuclear blast, atomic blast, the last moments of their life, go check out on Google Shadows of Hiroshima, and you'll start to see some images, right? Check that out, educate yourself. Here we get the house is starting to be destroyed. It's starting to burn down. And it's doing so in a way that takes on the image, through metaphor, of course, of like a skeleton with the veins and everything exposed. And you might say, yes, this is completely horrific, it's gross. Let's not forget this was reality for those people at Hiroshima, Nagasaki, right? Let's not forget this really did happen with the atomic bombs. We read science fiction about a society at large that has societies that have been destroyed. Let's not forget about those two places, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, 70,000 dead, just instant, right? Just within, kind of instant terms. And then, of course, you have what some people would say, at least 100,000 or more people who are affected by this going on, right? With mutations and such, right? You can look this up more and more. But one thing I could imagine being a surgeon, a nurse, somebody in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, maybe further away from the epicenters, who's seeing the level of damage done to people, the bodies just completely burned away, the skin, right? You can see underneath. This is reality, and it's frightening. And the house is taking on this form to remind us that this is a reality. This has happened. I've never read to that extent. That's me kind of, that's me taking a guess at why we would have this specific imagery here, red veins and capillaries, quiver in the scalded air. Just imagine yourself what it was like to be a nurse or a surgeon in one of those cities, trying to help people. Whew. Let's move on, right? Let's understand why he's putting this here. It's to talk about the real events that have occurred, who we are as real people, right? It's always a commentary. It's social commentary, right? It's to get us talking about real life. All right, some words here at the end. Go rather quick through some key diction in the final few paragraphs. Lots of stuff here. Insanely, maniac, psychopathic, hysterically hissing. All of these words essentially describe people who are out of their minds, right? And the house is behaving in this way. And what is going to be the best example of insanity when we think about the context of this story, some of the references we've been making? I think for me and my students, we kind of figured it's probably the countries involved. It's the US government. It's the Soviet Union, as it would have been back in this time period, right? Writing in the 60s. The countries that are capable and have demonstrated through use of major destruction, right? Military destruction. Maybe it takes a psychopath to do something like that, to make the decision to create that, to make the decision to drop it. Of course, we understand a lot of this is this kind of need to compete in the arms races that we have as these kinds of unfortunate facts of the world. But at the same time, are these people out of their minds? This idea I would share is also, we could say with people with insane amounts of wealth like Jeff Bezos, like Amazon and all these things. Other people too. The Walton family of Walmart, right, fame. Is having that much money insane? Is it crazy? We don't tend to question it all that much, but I think here the diction at the end, in a description of the home and how it's trying to fend itself off from a sense of rebirth, the fire, burn, grow again, it's going out of its mind, right? And maybe that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of a people, our interactions on a world stage. It could be hysterically hissing. There's the serpent, right? Just to give you that biblical. As we move into the next text, the next lecture will be the Million-Year Picnic. You'll see the extension of biblical allusion used as well. So you do get it here. It brings us back to Baal. Remember, Babylonian civilization was antagonistic to Hebrew civilization, the Israelites, right, in Israel. So of course in the Bible, which is essentially going to champion the Israelites, right, the Hebrew side of things, you're going to get a very negative depiction of the Babylonians, right, because they, in fact, through their technological superiority, it was Babylon that heaved major destruction and ruin upon Israel and some of their settlements and military fortifications. And they did it through an advanced military and advanced technology, right? Easy to do when you have that. So you can see why this house, like Baal, is going to take on this serpent, the mark of the beast characteristic here. And then all skeletons thrown in a cluttered mound deep under, mounds of skeletons. I'm sure that speaks to perhaps the Hiroshima-Nagasaki events. It also speaks to the Holocaust, which he may be referencing here at the end, the extermination of Jewish, Gypsy, homosexual, political dissident populations in Germany and throughout Europe. It could be a reference to that as well, and the extreme cruelty. And again, what do we know about Germany? Military superiority. They had some of the most advanced technology. In fact, the U.S. ends up essentially commandeering key Nazi scientists, especially in the aeronautics industries, and bringing them to the U.S. and essentially giving them asylum, I guess you could say, so that they could continue their work, only this time benefiting U.S. interest, right? Military interest. So there's a big history to this. You can start to look it up. So it could be a reference to the Holocaust, the idea of just mounds of skeletons and burials, right? Okay, the last thing here that I think is of interest to note is the house is gone, but the voice remains. And it repeats, my story's been wanting to blow away from me this whole lecture here, right? It almost did so here at the end. And it says, today is August 5th, 2026. We're not quite there yet, right? Still got up 5 years. Today is August 5th, August 26th today is, and it just goes on to repeat itself. A couple things. Ironic in the sense that it is repeating a date and a calendar date that really only human beings find interest in. Go tell your dog what the day is today. He or she will not care. Go tell your pet snake that it's Wednesday today. They won't give a darn. They're just going to ask where their next meal is, right? And they're going to look at you with those wonderful eyes. Snakes do have beautiful eyes, don't they? I don't know. I don't have one. But anyways, it's only of interest to humans, and ironically, humans are now totally extinct, right? This house being kind of the last representation of who they were and perhaps the conflicts and problems that led them into the state of annihilation, right? And this nuclear holocaust. The other thing is this, the voice remains, maybe the AI continues. One of the more interesting ideas I've heard, futurist, just science fiction, I guess you could say, is, and science, human beings, I guess it could be that one day, this world, even though it looks beautiful today, happy to be here, it might become unhospitable to human beings. It'll be too polluted. It'll be too crowded. We'll have nuclear annihilation. We'll have to press on. So it could be that human beings essentially go extinct someday. And perhaps by that point, could be hundreds of years into the future, we're going to have to find a way to keep our humanity alive, right? Even though we in the flesh may no longer exist, right? Due to foreseeable and unforeseeable circumstances, we need to pass on our experiences, our ethics, our morals, our aspirations, our sense of ourselves, etc., etc., in a way that up to this point only human beings could do. So how are we going to do this? AI and robots are the vessel, where we essentially implant human consciousness to the best of our ability, and who knows how advanced this might be in the next 100, 200, 300 years, right, as we still exist. Our ability to pass on human consciousness into machines, essentially, AI, algorithms, and they living on with us and for us, perhaps, right, and being able to do it because of their robotic nature, and they don't have the biodegradable kind of compounds, of course, that the body has. They can be made in a way to never ruin, never go away. Think of the movie AI. I like the movie. I guess if you don't overwatch it, it's pretty good. You watch it once in a while. But that's really what speaks to the young boy's experience, is that he's going to live on as a human boy in a world that human beings no longer exist, and he will live on through, for the rest of time, because he is an android and he can just, live those kinds of years. We're talking about thousands of years, right? Never expiring. So maybe it will be passed on, is an interesting thought here at the very end of There Will Come Soft Rains. I hope that was informative. I really like to highlight the biblical themes, especially that reference to Baal, which I'm shocked how some people just gloss over it, because that takes you really to probably some of the most interesting themes and commentary going. The next lecture will be the companion piece to this, Million Year Picnic. And check out, I'll put it up here at the end, the link to the first chapter lecture, definitive analysis for Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? Because if you're interested in these themes of AI, human, distinguishing between the two, how this line gets so interestingly blurred, you're going to want to check out lectures to that book, read the book. Even if you haven't read it, they're kind of made so that you can just follow along, and it's definitely a really good book, and you'll see some of those themes come to light. All right, I hope everybody has a good day. See you next time.